Socky, can I sit there with you? Can I have my chair back? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Here we are. Oh, there. Here's Socks. And he's tired because he was awake all night again. Because it's summer and the weather's changeable. And outside, it's obviously very exciting when you're a cat. Because everything, whoops, is full of promise. And it things smell differently. When it rains and then it dries out outside, all the vegetation, all the ground, in all the gardens, releases these tantalizing smells for cats. Look, you could look in the camera, Socks. Everyone wants to see you. He's facing me. You can see his ears, look. So he's awake all the time and then running in the house and telling me all about it. And when he's soaking wet, he wakes me up to dry him, which is really naughty. I hope everyone's well. Oh, look at your face. I hope you're all doing okay. I hesitate to say I'm at the end of a novel. I don't think I am. I don't know. I've got to the end of an extra chapter in this book. I don't know if this is going to come to anything at all. It's a crazy last chapter, quite murderous and quite wicked. So we'll see. I'm going to leave it fallow for a bit and think about it and go back. I've reread it today. I've also dipped into an outline I'm writing for a project that I want to work on next year in collaboration with a lovely editor. I can't say any more than that, I'm afraid. I'll talk all about it when the time comes, but it needs a long outline writing, and so I've done a splot of that. I've worked out one episode in this thing that needs to be done. So I'm dipping into different projects. And something else I'm thinking about at the back of my head is the fact that just the other day I found out which was the exact ghost story written by Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens together. I don't know if I've talked about this on this channel before, maybe not. It's always been in the back of my head. In Lancaster, where I was a student for so long, for 7 years, they opened a branch of Waterstones, and it was the first one I ever saw in 1989, I think, when I was 19. I think it opened round about my 19th birthday, 20th birthday. And we lived in town at this point, and it was over the road from an alley where there was the cafe on Bashful Alley, this tiny cafe where they did cinnamon toast and cappuccinos, and you sat in a booth with the books you just bought from Waterstones. And Waterstones then, of course, was exciting and modern. And on the front tables, they had all the new books that were coming out, it seemed. They had such a kind of grand selection. Anyway, the rumour was that the Waterstones occupied only the front of this huge building, and I think it's the King's Head Hotel in Lancaster, which was a Victorian hotel, very grand looking. Round the back in the basement there was a cocktail bar, and every Thursday night, I think this is right, that was the town's only gay bar at this point in the 80s, late 80s. It was the first gay bar I ever went to, and it was packed out. I can't tell you how full it was. And it was very genteel. Anyway, Waterstones was very posh downstairs as well. It had chandeliers in the fiction section, a huge crystal chandelier. But the story went that above that there was the room that Dickens and Wilkie Collins had shared in 60, 70 odd. I should check the year. And Wilkie Collins, of course, I read as much as Dickens at that point. I love The Moonstone and The Woman in White and everything else I'd read by him. And the story was they collaborated through the night on a ghost story back then. And for some reason I'd never looked it up to find out what it was. thinking, I suppose, that it might be a letdown after the legend. But this week, for some reason, it popped into my head again, and I looked it up, and it turns out it was one of a number of articles they wrote in tandem or together while on the road. They went on a kind of road tour, like on the road, 100 years before. And they went around the Lake District, Cumbria, and parts of Lancashire. And they were aiming at places that you couldn't get to by train. I think that's right. So it was looking for places off the beaten track. And they stayed in hotels. And the bits I've read seem to consist of them writing ghost stories about places and describing what they have for dinner. And their dinners, like Victorian dinners always were in these places, extremely grand and plentiful. There's course after course. The book that eventually came out of this, because it was a series of articles for Household Words, the magazine that Dickens edited, and it became a book called An Idle Tour. No, is this right? The Lazy Tour for Two Idle Apprentices. Anyway, I've got it coming in the post to me soon, so we'll see what it's like. It might be bobbins, don't know yet. But I thought, what a brilliant basis for a little trip at some point. And I wonder if we can do it. Visit some of these hotels and little towns, make it into a book shopping and ghost hunting and meals out and gathering stories kind of tour. I wonder. That might be a project. And then Jeremy, when I mentioned it to him, said, let's go to Scotland. Let's do the trip around Scotland we've been talking about for years and years, which seemed like a sudden and fantastic plan. So we'll see. We might get some road trips coming up. Right, in the meantime, I'm going to carry on doing these outlines for things. I seem to have a lot of projects in the planning stages, which is nice. That's looking ahead to working in the autumn and thinking of what next year's work might consist of. So there's a new termy feeling about that. But we haven't had the holidays yet. Still haven't had any time off. So I'm thinking about because it's sunny, it makes me want to sit about just reading. And Socks is going to fall off the edge of this chair. He's cleaning himself assiduously, but he's going to lose his balance and you'll see him fall over backwards off my lap. So I've been finishing off some books. I've put them back on the shelf so I can't even get them down because I'm weighed down by cat. But I finished Body Snatchers by Jack Finney from 1955, I think. And I've talked about it over the last kind of couple of weeks, but it really is fantastic. I think of the 3 or 4 Gollancz science fiction novels that I've read from their Masterwork series this summer, it's the best. And it's so influential on almost every science fiction film and TV show you've ever seen. He kind of creates some cornerstones of the genre in terms of the whole, the idea that people the closest to you, people you know, being replaced by these sinister, blank-faced, emotionless zombies. And you can see why it's a very loaded metaphor, why people would use it again and again. I think it's the basis of lots of zombie narratives as well. That the familiar becomes utterly unfamiliar. And kind of in an almost banal way, the replacements are sinister and they're quite polite about their intentions. They're not murderous and bloodthirsty. They give our heroes some time to get used to the fact that they're going to be taken over, which of course is a mistake because then our heroes manage to use their brains and elude their captors and eventually fight back. But it's a very interesting book, I think. Not without some boring bits, of course, but then what book doesn't have some boring bits? Really interesting, and I'm glad I went back to find this kind of text of so much science fiction. I finished something else. The Dark Forces novel, the first in that highly sought after teen series from the 80s. The Game, the one about the twins. They're both in a car accident. One of them loses her mobility. She's in a wheelchair. She turns bitter. She gets taken over by the spirit that inhabits their house, that attacked the priest who comes to help this time. So there's kind of bits of Amityville there, even a plague of flies at one point, and the priest who's so aware of what's going on in the house because he'd seen it before. There's touches of lots of different popular 70s horror stories, touches of The Exorcist, but all kind of bound up in this world of kind of Sweet Valley High characters. And that's fantastic to have those genres collide like that. I'm almost at the end of this, Sweet Home Alaska, which I might have talked about before, which is a kind of 1930s rewrite of Little House on the Prairie. It's by Carol Estby Dagg, and I'm not sure, it's autobiographical or at least about her family. I'll have to check on that. I'm completely convinced by it, the detail in it, and I love the way that the kids in it, the girl at the heart of it, Terpsichore, all the family are named after Greek muses because of a pretentious grandma in Wisconsin, is bookish, and she sets up a small town library with her friends. They sell popcorn, they wash nappies, they do anything they can in order to be able to create their own town library, which they do bit by bit, and then the church and the school take it off them. And the scene where she goes to complain and flings things at the headmistress is brilliant, really forceful, and very telling about those moments when, as a kid, as a young teen, you feel like adults just step in and piss on your world because they're adults and they can, and take things off you and don't trust you to do things properly. And that came back very vividly, things being taken off you when you've been doing everything you can to make them work. And so she's also a character who is living very self-consciously in this kind of pioneer's world. She loves the Little House on the Prairie books. I think there's only 2 at the point that this is set. And in the Christmas, there's a wonderful Christmas chapter, as there always are in the Little House books. She gets given the second volume, Little House on the Prairie, which is newly out, and she wants to race off and immediately and read what happened to Laura in this second book. And she's modelling her life in the present of 1936 on that, and the tone is there in the writing. So for anybody who loves those books, it's lovely to read. But set in this modern world where people touch down in planes and film stars arrive and get killed in plane accidents, and telegrams go off to the White House, and Mrs. Roosevelt sends help. So it's in a kind of more recognisably 20th century world than Laura Ingalls Wilder, but it's still a lifetime ago to us, and very quaint and very kind of, they're really scraping a living, and you hear a lot about how they've got to prepare their food and stock it and hide from the cold in the winter. So it's very atmospheric and a lot of fun. And I'm also coming to the end of my Batman novel, my Batman prequel by Marie Lu, in this, I think they're called DC Comics Icons series. And it has made me think a lot about Batman and my love of that whole character and everything that has grown out of that character. And I've been thinking about my favourite comics and graphic novels over the years. My favourite of the movies and the TV shows, whether live action or animated, and how many there are, how many iterations of this character. And I love the fact, this is what I love about Batman, that all these different versions can stand together, contradicting each other. So when Mary Lou writes this as a prequel about, pre-Batman Bruce Wayne, it's just after the TV show Gotham, and it contradicts it completely, although I was never a big viewer of Gotham, not yet. I'd like to, though. I haven't caught up with that. I don't know why. But that doesn't matter to the people who read and watch these things. It seems that there are lots of different alternate versions, and I think that's a healthy way for a franchise to behave. It doesn't have to build up in a line. And one of the weird things about Doctor Who, for example, is that it always does build up in a line. He's the end product of all those stories, and I don't think that works. Weird that the show that shouldn't be linear is the most linear. So I like Batman's multifariousness, and it has made me want to explore some of the bits I haven't read or watched yet. What's next? I've got a pile of books that I'm considering launching into next. Let me, just talk through them briefly. Let me see. Okay. Sorry. Leaning in. I talked about this before, the Star Trek novel, The Starless World, Gordon Eklund, which I first read in 1984. So it's 40 years ago. And I found this copy again in Bobcat Books around the corner and realised that it was the one that I'd liked, I think, more than anything else. So that's definitely on my pile. So is Jonathan Carroll, who I've obviously talked about how many times I've read The Land of Laughs, his first book from 1980, and how much I love that book. And how in the early 90s I read a couple more that followed on, but I've forgotten which is which or what happens. So I went digging around and managed to buy the next, I think, 4 of his in paperback. So I've got a little pile of Jonathan Carroll. And the next one, after The Land of Laughs, I think it's not any kind of follow-on at all, but it's thematically, his world opens out through the books and they continue in that sense. It's a kind of spiritual successor rather than a sequel. Is this one, and I want to read Voice of Our Shadow. That's on the pile. I bought Board Gay Werewolf quite recently in the nice new bookshop in town and still haven't read it. And so that's on my pile for August, shall we say. Let's say they're August books. At the same time, I bought this lovely copy of Peter Hedges' novel What's Eating Gilbert Grape, which of course was a wonderful movie 30 years ago. At the time I read, I can see it up there, An Ocean in Iowa, his novel that came out after that. And as I remember, I liked it, but I didn't read anything more by him. I don't understand myself sometimes, why I enjoy somebody's work and then didn't go and look up what else they'd done or get hold of what else they'd done. I think looking back, that was probably because it was the 90s and you didn't necessarily have the tools to do that. We don't think twice now, do we, about Googling someone or looking on Goodreads or looking on Amazon. That only happened in about 97 for me when I first had my job at UEA and I had a shitty old computer in my office. They gave me a fourth-hand computer that was yellowed with nicotine and the screen never stayed still. It kept flickering like this, but to me it was like this magic doorway into a kind of cyberpunk Narnia where I discovered Amazon and Rec Arts discussion groups and fandoms of all sorts. And so it was very useful. And I found that you could find things out. You could find what the other books by such and such an author was. Before, you could only go to the library, and that depended on what they had in stock. And of course, for American authors, they didn't always have them all. So I forget that maybe the reason I didn't find out what else Peter Hedges had written was you just couldn't find out then. I've been talking about these Gallant science fiction books and just chatting online with my friend Stuart. This morning he was talking about Christopher Priest. I think it went from a discussion of Stephen Baxter, who he's reading now, into the idea of sequels of To the Time Machine, one of which Stephen Baxter wrote. And I was talking about how nice I thought Stephen Baxter was as a person, because we'd worked together on Invading the Earth, a TV show in 1995 or something, 6. And also there was a sequel to The Time Machine written by Christopher Priest, and which I'd read. And I remembered the bit where the time machine, rather than a bike, is a bed, a 4-poster bed or something, and it goes flying around on the surface of Mars. It's a kind of mashup of War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. Anyway, Stuart recommended Inverted World by Christopher Priest, which I just happened to have got in my delivery of Gallant's books recently. He was in my head because of his recent demise. And people were talking about him and his cancelled Doctor Who story from 1980, which I still don't know much about, but it sounded so intriguing. Anyway, Inverted World is my next Gallant science fiction book in this SF marathon that I'm slowly doing. My cushion behind me, look, is almost in Gallant's colours. I've got a science fiction cushion for my head. And a fanny flag. This is The Wonder Boy of Whistle Stop. It's a sequel, or at least a book related to Fried Green Tomatoes, one of my favourite films, and I love the book as well. Although the book predates it, and the book isn't as elegant as the film in terms of tying things up. I might be mistaken about that. I know it's different, and maybe the fact is that the film ties things up too neatly, perhaps. I don't know. But anyway, I want to return to that world. I love her storytelling voice, and that's on the pile. Also on the pile are the books that I bought for my local book club, Round the Doors, our Levenshulme book club. It only has 6 members, I think 6, but we have a great time every month. And brilliantly, we met last Monday before last, and programmed, watch out socks, if you can see how I'm negotiating these stacks without bringing everything down. We actually organised our next 6 or 7 months. There's more right at the top, I won't get those down. But these are the next few months, and so we know what day, whose house, which venue, and everyone's chosen a book for the day, for the evening that they host. And our next one is a Faye Weldon novel, Puffball, from I think 1980. I went onto eBay and got quite fancy editions of all of these for not an awful lot of money, which is very lucky. I'd much rather read nice vintage hardbacks. This I've had for a while, to replace my original copy, but my suggestion was John Irving, Hotel New Hampshire, which is a bit long for one of our book club books, but I just think it's so brilliant and I think they'll like it. What else? Devil House by John Danielle, which is a more recent kind of gothic-y horror thriller. And Moscow Stations by Venedikt Yerofeev, a Russian novel, which I think we're doing on the, coincidentally or not, on the anniversary of the Russian Revolution. And at Christmas, O. Henry and the Gift of the Magi. This particular edition has a story called The Last Leaf, which has particular meaning for one of the members of our group, because he accidentally found the place where the story is set and was told the story by somebody who lives there in this house in Greenwich Village a couple of months ago. And he was messaging me saying about this. And I looked it up and found the story, and it's wonderful. Anyway, so it's a nice Christmas volume. It's one of these Penguin cloth-bound miniature classics where they put in a bunch of stories, and there's a list in the back of the ones they offer. I haven't seen all of these. They don't have them all in the shops usually. But there's a Italo Calvino, there's a Truman Capote, a Carson McCullers, Ballad of the Sad Cafe. That's a nice thing to buy as a little book. Virginia Woolf's Street Haunting. I don't know that. It sounds like it's essays, doesn't it? Something about walking in the city. Some of them are kind of obvious, like Catherine Mansfield's Bliss, or George Orwell, or putting The Blue Carbuncle by Arthur Conan Doyle as the kind of title story of a book. But they're just so lovely and readable. Okay, I've gone on way too long. I've shown you what I intend to read, which isn't my usual way, is it? Usually I told you what I have read. That's what I tend to do. So it's quite nice saying, here's my possibilities. Let me know which of them you would read straight away, what you would read next, and tell me what you're reading. Can you hear Socks singing on my lap? He sings this kind of fluting song under his breath. It's a bit like he's snoring, but he's not asleep. He's just telling me stuff. Okay, I shall go. Goodbye. See you again soon in the next episode.